Silent bias rarely announces itself with shouting or open hatred. Most of the time, it hides behind polite language, procedural excuses, and company policy. It shows up in glances that linger too long, in decisions made too quickly, and in assumptions formed without a single question being asked. On that flight, silent bias was already present long before the words were spoken. It lived in the moment the staff looked at the passenger in the VIP seat and decided, without verification, that he was the most removable person in the cabin. No investigation, no confirmation, no hesitation. Just an unspoken agreement formed by appearance alone. Public humiliation does not always come from insults. Sometimes it comes from being singled out while others watch. When the request was made for him to leave the VIP seat, it wasn't done quietly or privately. It was done in full view of other passengers. Laughter followed, not necessarily cruel laughter, but the kind that comes from social permission. When authority acts, people feel allowed to react. That laughter became a signal that the crowd had already chosen a side. The humiliation deepened not because of the request itself, but because of the audience witnessing it and silently validating it. Silent bias thrives in environments where speed is valued more than fairness. The crew believed they were resolving a situation efficiently, but efficiency without equity becomes discrimination. They assumed inconvenience would be smallest if it fell on him. That assumption was rooted in years of social conditioning where certain people are expected to comply without resistance. Public humiliation becomes easy when the person targeted is perceived as unlikely to push back. In that moment, his calm demeanor was mistaken for weakness, and his silence was interpreted as submission. The most damaging part of public humiliation is not the embarrassment itself, but the stripping away of dignity. Dignity is lost when someone is reduced to a problem to be moved rather than a person to be respected. As eyes turned toward him, his identity was rewritten by strangers. He was no longer a guest who had earned that seat. He became an obstacle. Silent bias allowed everyone to feel comfortable with that transformation because no one had to say the real reason out loud. What made the situation heavier was the imbalance of power. Authority uniforms, policies, and procedures gave one side confidence, while the other side was expected to accept the outcome quietly. Public humiliation often relies on this imbalance. The target is expected to prioritize peace over self-respect. The unspoken message is clear. Resisting will only make things worse. This is why silent bias is so effective. It does not force compliance. It assumes it. In moments like these, humiliation is amplified by isolation. Even when surrounded by people, the individual feels alone. No one intervened. No one questioned the decision. Silence from the crowd became another form of agreement. Silent bias is contagious in that way. It spreads through inaction. Every passenger who looked away unknowingly reinforced the idea that this treatment was acceptable. Public humiliation does not require a villain. It only requires enough people to stay quiet. Yet silent bias often underestimates the internal strength of those it targets. What the crew and passengers could not see was the discipline required to remain composed under disrespect. Staying calm in the face of humiliation is not weakness. It is control. That control prevented the situation from escalating emotionally while allowing space for a strategic response. Public humiliation aims to provoke either anger or surrender. When neither appears, it disrupts the expected script. There is also a deeper cost to silent bias that goes beyond a single incident. Every public humiliation sends a message to others watching who identify with the person targeted. It teaches them where they are believed to belong. It reminds them of the limits others place on them. These moments accumulate, shaping how people navigate public spaces, how much they speak up, and how much of themselves they shrink to avoid attention. Silent bias doesn't just harm one individual. It conditions entire communities. What makes this story powerful is not just the humiliation, but the exposure of the bias behind it. Once revealed, silent bias loses its protection. It depends on remaining unnamed and unquestioned. The moment facts replace assumptions, the foundation cracks. Public humiliation collapses when the audience realizes it was misplaced. The laughter fades, the confidence shifts, and the same silence that once supported the bias becomes heavy with discomfort. Assumptions are shortcuts the mind takes when it believes it already understands a situation. On the surface, they feel efficient, even harmless. In reality, assumptions are powerful forces that shape decisions, behavior, and outcomes long before facts have a chance to speak. In everyday life, these assumptions operate quietly, guiding choices in offices, airports, stores, and boardrooms. On that flight, the decision to remove the man from the VIP seat was not based on evidence, credentials, or verification. It was based on a story already written in someone else's mind. The danger of assumptions lies in how confidently they present themselves. They do not ask permission. They arrive fully formed, dressed as common sense. The crew assumed they knew who deserved comfort and who could be inconvenienced. Passengers assumed the situation must be justified, because authority was involved. Each assumption leaned on the next, creating a chain reaction that felt logical to everyone participating in it. No one stopped to ask the simplest question: what if we're wrong? Everyday decisions influenced by assumptions often feel too small to challenge. People tell themselves it's not worth making a scene, not worth slowing things down, not worth questioning a process. But these small decisions accumulate into patterns. Patterns turn into culture. Culture then determines who is trusted, who is doubted, and who is easily displaced. In this case, the assumption was that status is visible, that importance looks a certain way, and that power would announce itself clearly before demanding respect. Assumptions also shape how people interpret behavior. His calm response was seen as compliance rather than confidence. His silence was read as acceptance rather than restraint. When people assume weakness, they feel safer applying pressure. This is how everyday assumptions escalate into moments of public injustice. The absence of visible resistance becomes permission to continue. What was overlooked was the possibility that composure can be a deliberate choice, not a lack of options. The impact of assumptions extends beyond the person targeted. It influences how witnesses respond. When passengers saw the situation unfolding, many relied on their own assumptions to make sense of it. They assumed the airline staff must be right. They assumed the passenger must have done something wrong. These assumptions removed any sense of responsibility to intervene. When people believe the system is functioning correctly, they rarely feel compelled to question its outcomes. One of the most damaging assumptions in everyday life is the belief that fairness is automatic. People assume that rules are applied equally, that authority figures act without bias, and that mistakes are rare exceptions. This belief allows injustice to hide in plain sight. When fairness is assumed, evidence of unfairness is often dismissed as misunderstanding or exaggeration. In that moment on the flight, fairness was not examined. It was presumed. Assumptions are especially dangerous because they feel personal while operating socially. Each individual thinks they are making an independent judgment, but those judgments are shaped by shared narratives. Society teaches us who looks powerful, who looks trustworthy, and who looks replaceable. These lessons seep into everyday decisions, even among people who believe they are unbiased. The crew did not need to express prejudice openly. The assumption did the work for them. What assumptions often fail to account for is complexity. Human lives do not fit neatly into visual categories. Titles, experiences, and achievements are not always visible. When decisions are made based on appearance alone, they erase the depth of a person's story. The CEO was not just a passenger with a seat assignment. He was someone who had navigated rooms far more complex than an airplane cabin. That reality remained invisible until the assumption was challenged. The moment assumptions are confronted, their fragility becomes clear. They cannot survive contact with facts. But until that moment arrives, assumptions feel unshakable. They guide tone of voice, body language, and decisions. They determine who is asked to explain themselves and who is given the benefit of the doubt. In everyday life, this means some people move through spaces with ease, while others are constantly required to justify their presence. The true impact of assumptions is not measured only by the harm they cause in a single moment, but by the normalization of that harm. When assumptions go unchallenged, They teach everyone involved that this is how things work. They become invisible rules that govern interaction. Breaking those rules requires either courage or consequence. On that flight, it took the quiet certainty of truth to expose how quickly everyday assumptions can turn into extraordinary mistakes. Pressure reveals character more clearly than comfort ever could. When a person is placed in a moment of public challenge, stripped of privacy and surrounded by judgment, the instinctive reactions begin to surface. Some respond with anger, others with fear, and many with silence born from shock. In that cabin, under the weight of stares and laughter, dignity became a personal choice rather than a guaranteed right. Maintaining dignity under pressure is not about winning an argument in the moment. It is about refusing to surrender one's sense of self. Dignity does not depend on how others behave. It depends on how one chooses to respond. The situation was designed, intentionally or not, to provoke embarrassment. The public setting magnified every word, every movement. Any emotional outburst would have confirmed the assumptions already forming in the minds of those watching. Restraint in that moment was not passive. It was strategic. It required discipline to separate emotion from action and to recognize that the situation demanded clarity rather than confrontation. Under pressure, many people feel compelled to explain themselves. They rush to justify their presence, their worth, their right to be where they are. Dignity resists that impulse. It does not beg for validation. By remaining composed, he avoided participating in a narrative that framed him as someone seeking approval. Instead, he held his ground internally, even as the external circumstances attempted to diminish him. This internal steadiness prevented the situation from defining him on its own terms. Pressure often creates a false sense of urgency. Authority figures rely on this urgency to push decisions through without reflection. The expectation is that the person under pressure will comply quickly to end the discomfort. Dignity slows the moment down. It introduces pause where chaos is expected. That pause can feel unsettling to those exerting control because it disrupts their momentum. Calm presence becomes a form of resistance that does not escalate but also does not yield. Maintaining dignity under pressure also protects one's future, not just the present moment. An impulsive reaction may feel satisfying briefly, but it can be used later to discredit legitimate concerns. By staying composed, he preserved credibility. His response could not be dismissed as emotional instability or defiance. Instead, it highlighted the imbalance of the situation without adding noise. Dignity ensured that when the facts emerged, they would stand alone, uncontaminated by unnecessary drama. There is a misconception that dignity requires silence at all costs. In truth, dignity is not about saying nothing. It is about saying the right thing at the right time. Sometimes that means waiting. Sometimes that means choosing action over words. Under pressure, the ability to delay response until clarity is achieved is a sign of strength. It demonstrates confidence in one's position and trust in truth to assert itself when given space. The weight of pressure is heavier when it is unjust. Being treated unfairly while expected to remain calm can feel like an added burden. Yet dignity under these circumstances becomes a quiet assertion of equality. It communicates that respect is not conditional. Even when others fail to offer it, dignity insists on maintaining it internally. This internal insistence limits the damage humiliation can cause. It prevents the situation from rewriting one's self-perception. Witnesses often misunderstand dignity. To some, calmness appears like compliance. They mistake self-control for surrender. What they do not see is the mental calculation taking place. Choosing dignity means choosing a response that serves long-term outcomes over short-term release. It means understanding that power does not always need to be displayed loudly to be effective. Sometimes, its strength lies in patience and precision. Under pressure, the body reacts instinctively. Heart rate increases, thoughts race, and emotions surge. Dignity requires awareness of these reactions and the ability to regulate them. This regulation is a skill developed over time, often through experiences where one has had to navigate spaces that were not designed to be welcoming. That lived experience becomes an advantage, allowing calm to coexist with alertness. The moment pressure eases, the true impact of dignity becomes visible. Those who applied the pressure begin to reassess. Confidence built on assumptions starts to waver. Observers reinterpret what they witnessed. What once looked like vulnerability now appears as restraint. Dignity reframes the narrative without a single raised voice. It transforms the story from one of subjugation into one of quiet authority, leaving behind an unmistakable shift in how power is perceived. One calm response can carry more weight than 1,000 raised voices. In moments charged with emotion and imbalance, calm becomes unexpected. And because it is unexpected, it is powerful. When tension fills a space, people anticipate resistance, apology, or submission. Calm disrupts all three. It refuses to match the chaos in front of it, and in doing so, it changes the energy of the situation. The impact of a calm response is not immediate noise, but a slow, undeniable shift in control. Calmness is often misunderstood as passivity. In reality, it is an active choice that requires awareness and intention. Remaining calm under unfair treatment means recognizing that emotional escalation benefits the aggressor more than the person being targeted. In that moment on the flight, calmness prevented the situation from turning into a spectacle driven by emotion rather than facts. It kept the focus where it belonged, on the decision being made and the assumptions behind it. A calm response creates psychological imbalance for those exerting authority. They expect fear, anger, or compliance. When none of these appear, uncertainty enters the equation. That uncertainty weakens confidence. Authority relies heavily on predictable reactions. When a person responds calmly, it forces others to reconsider their approach. The script they were following no longer applies, and without that script, their power feels less secure. Calm also invites observation rather than reaction. It allows the individual to assess the environment, the people involved, and the potential consequences of each option. This clarity is impossible when emotions are in control. By staying calm, he preserved the ability to think strategically. The response was not about proving a point in that instant, but about choosing an action that would have lasting impact. Calm made room for precision. The power of calm extends beyond the individual to the audience. When witnesses see someone remain composed under pressure, it subtly shifts their perception. What initially appeared justified begins to feel uncomfortable. The laughter fades, the attention sharpens, and the room grows quiet. Calm exposes the imbalance in the situation without calling it out directly. It invites others to question what they are seeing, even if they do not speak up. Calm responses also protect the integrity of the message. Anger can dilute truth by making it easier to dismiss. A calm tone, on the other hand, forces others to confront the content rather than the delivery. It removes distractions. In high-stakes moments, being heard matters more than being loud. Calm ensures that when words are spoken, they land with clarity rather than being lost in emotion. There is a discipline behind calmness that is often invisible. It requires emotional regulation, self-awareness, and confidence in one's position. This discipline is built through experience, especially in environments where one is frequently underestimated. Calm becomes a survival skill. It allows individuals to navigate spaces where reactions are scrutinized and misinterpreted. Over time, calm transforms from a defense into a tool of influence. The impact of a calm response is also cumulative. Each moment of restraint builds credibility. When the truth finally emerges, the calm demeanor reinforces its authenticity. Observers are more likely to accept the outcome because it aligns with the composure they witnessed earlier. Calm lays the groundwork for accountability. It ensures that when consequences arrive, they feel earned rather than forced. Calm does not mean the absence of action. It often precedes decisive moves. The most effective actions are rarely impulsive. They are measured, intentional, and timed. Calm allows action to be guided by purpose rather than reaction. In this case, calm created the space for a single, deliberate step that shifted the balance entirely. That step carried weight precisely because it was not rushed. In a world that often rewards loudness, calm can feel counterintuitive. Yet its impact is profound. It disarms aggression, unsettles authority built on assumption, and reframes power dynamics without confrontation. Calm changes the narrative by refusing to participate in chaos. It turns a moment of attempted humiliation into an opportunity for clarity, leaving behind a silence that speaks louder than any argument. Authority and character are often confused, especially in environments where uniforms, titles, and procedures carry visible power. Authority is something granted by position. Character is something revealed by behavior. On that flight, authority spoke first. It issued instructions, cited policy, and expected compliance. Character, however, was tested in the response. The contrast between the two became clearer with every passing moment, exposing how easily authority can exist without integrity. Authority depends heavily on perception. When people believe in it, they reinforce it. When they don't question it, it grows stronger. The crew's confidence came not only from their roles, but from the assumption that their decisions would go unchallenged. Authority often assumes correctness simply because it is recognized. Character does not rely on recognition. It operates consistently, regardless of whether anyone is watching or applauding. One of the dangers of authority without character is its tendency to prioritize control over fairness. Procedures become shields rather than guides. Policies are invoked selectively, not to ensure justice but to maintain order. In this situation, authority acted swiftly, but not thoughtfully. It valued resolution over accuracy. Character, on the other hand, values correctness even when it complicates the moment. It resists the urge to simplify at the expense of someone else's dignity. Character reveals itself most clearly when it would be easier to act otherwise. It is easy to be respectful when there is no pressure, easy to be fair when there is no inconvenience. Under stress, true priorities surface. The calm, measured response of the man being targeted highlighted a character rooted in self-respect and discipline. Meanwhile, the hurried, assumption-driven actions of those in authority revealed a lack of reflection. Authority often expects deference. It anticipates that people will adjust their behavior simply because of who is in charge. Character does not demand deference. It earns respect. This distinction matters because respect built on fear is fragile. It disappears the moment authority is questioned. Respect built on character endures, even when power dynamics shift. In the cabin, authority began to weaken as character remained steady. Another key difference lies in accountability. Authority can deflect responsibility by pointing to systems, rules, or instructions from above. Character accepts responsibility for impact, not just intent. When actions cause harm, character acknowledges it. Authority without character avoids this reckoning. It hides behind structure. In moments like these, the absence of accountability becomes visible, not through words, but through discomfort and defensiveness. Character also shapes how power is exercised. Power guided by character is careful. It listens, verifies, and adjusts. Power guided only by authority is rigid. It resists correction because correction feels like a threat. On that flight, authority initially resisted pause and verification. It treated questioning as disruption. Character, however, understands that being questioned is part of acting responsibly. Witnesses instinctively recognize the difference between authority and character, even if they cannot articulate it. As the situation unfolded, the room's energy shifted. Confidence rooted in position began to feel hollow. Composure rooted in character began to feel solid. This shift altered how people interpreted the interaction. Authority started to look defensive. Character started to look commanding, even without commands being given. Character does not need to announce itself. It is consistent across situations. The same discipline shown under pressure would likely appear in leadership, negotiation, and decision-making elsewhere. Authority can change with context. Character does not. This consistency is what makes character trustworthy. It signals that a person's values are not situational. In contrast, authority that bends under scrutiny reveals its instability. When authority is challenged by truth, it must either evolve or collapse. Character does not face this dilemma because it aligns with truth from the start. In that moment, authority was forced to confront its own assumptions. The discomfort that followed was not caused by defiance, but by exposure. Character held steady while authority recalculated. The lasting lesson is not that authority is inherently wrong, but that it is insufficient on its own. Without character, authority becomes dangerous. It can harm without intention and justify itself afterward. Character acts as a compass, ensuring that power serves fairness rather than convenience. In the end, what commanded the room was not a title or a uniform, but the quiet certainty of someone who knew who they were. Regardless of how others tried to define them, institutions are often slow to learn because their mistakes are protected by routine. When actions are repeated often enough, they begin to feel correct, even when they cause harm. Policies become habits, and habits turn into blind spots. In moments like the one on that flight, the issue is not a single decision, but a system that allowed that decision to feel normal. Lessons are available, but institutions frequently resist them because learning requires acknowledgement, and acknowledgement threatens comfort. One of the reasons institutions refuse to learn is fear of liability. Admitting fault can feel dangerous, so defensiveness becomes the default response. Instead of examining why a situation unfolded the way it did, the focus shifts to minimizing exposure. This defensive posture discourages reflection. It prioritizes reputation over responsibility. As a result, the same patterns repeat, and each repetition reinforces the belief that nothing fundamentally needs to change. Institutions also rely heavily on hierarchy, which can silence correction. Lower-level employees may notice problems, but feel powerless to speak up. Higher-level decision-makers may be too removed from daily interactions to see the consequences of policy in action. This disconnect creates an environment where mistakes are neither challenged nor addressed. On that flight, the decision moved through a chain of authority without meaningful interruption, demonstrating how systems can act collectively without individual accountability. Another barrier to learning is the tendency to treat incidents as isolated events. By framing each mistake as a rare exception, institutions avoid confronting systemic issues. This framing allows them to issue surface-level responses without deeper change. Training sessions are added, statements are released, and operations continue unchanged. The lesson is acknowledged in words but rejected in practice. True learning would require questioning assumptions embedded in everyday procedures. Institutions often mistake compliance for understanding. Employees may follow rules correctly while missing their purpose. When policy is followed mechanically, empathy is lost. Decisions become transactional rather than human. In the cabin, procedure was followed, but context was ignored. The institution valued order over fairness, efficiency over dignity. This imbalance is not accidental. It is the result of systems designed without sufficient consideration for lived experience. Learning also demands humility, a quality institutions struggle to embody. Humility requires accepting that systems built with good intentions can still produce harmful outcomes. It requires listening to those affected, especially when their experiences contradict official narratives. Institutions prefer data and metrics because they feel objective. Personal stories feel messy and subjective, yet they reveal truths that numbers cannot capture. Ignoring those stories ensures that learning remains incomplete. Public exposure is often the only catalyst strong enough to force institutional learning. When private harm becomes visible, pressure mounts. Reputation, once protected by obscurity, becomes vulnerable. Only then do institutions begin to reassess. Even then, the response is often reactive rather than reflective. Changes are made to avoid recurrence, not to understand root causes. This reactive learning addresses symptoms, not systems. Another reason institutions resist learning is the belief that authority equals correctness. When decisions are made through official channels, they are assumed to be valid. Questioning them can be seen as insubordination. This belief discourages critical thinking and reinforces conformity. Over time, employees learn that safety lies in obedience, not insight. Innovation and ethical growth suffer as a result. The cost of institutional refusal to learn is borne by individuals. Each failure becomes a lived experience of exclusion, humiliation, or injustice. These experiences accumulate, shaping public trust. When people repeatedly encounter institutions that refuse to learn, they stop expecting fairness. Cynicism replaces confidence. This erosion of trust has consequences far beyond a single incident, affecting how communities engage with systems meant to serve them. Learning, when it finally occurs, often arrives too late for those already harmed. Apologies are issued after dignity has been compromised. Reforms are implemented after trust has been broken. The lesson is documented, but the damage remains. Institutions may move forward, but individuals carry the memory. This imbalance underscores why learning should not be reactive, but proactive. True institutional learning requires more than policy updates. It requires a shift in values, incentives, and accountability structures. It requires creating space for questioning without punishment and recognizing bias as a systemic issue rather than a personal flaw. Until institutions embrace this depth of learning, they will continue to repeat mistakes, surprised each time by consequences they had every opportunity to prevent.